Hi, you're in class with Dr. T.
Hi guys, today I want to talk about how slaves fought back and formed alternative community during the age of slavery. But before we get into that, I would like to espouse upon a concept called racial capitalism, a system elaborated and introduced by Cedric Robinson in his seminal work called Black Marxism, The Making of the Black Radical Tradition. In this book, he posits that capitalism has always been racialized. It is built upon the exploitation of racial differences where economic and racial oppression are interwoven. Robinson argues that from its inception, capitalism was structured by racial dynamics, utilizing colonialism, slavery, and other forms of racial subjugation to extract labor and resources. In this book, he really emphasizes that this is the kind of capitalism that we've lived in this world. I will not argue that maybe we can invent other forms of capitalism, or we can call it other types of economic systems. I do not want to get bogged down in that argument. But historically, we have known that the way our system has worked has always been racialized, particularly as it pertains to the modern world and the Western societies. Maroon societies has existed all throughout the Americas. During the age of slavery, roughly we're talking about the early 15th century, all the way up until the end of slavery, which the last country to end slavery in the Western world was Brazil in 1888. These communities, Maroon communities, were runaway slaves that created all kinds of various forms of Maroon societies. Some of them would last for a few weeks, others lasted more than 100 years, and others became recognized by their colonial masters as legitimate towns. However, the vast majority were destroyed by the colonizer, or over time limited the amount of autonomy, even if they became recognized. Nevertheless, they provided sources of inspiration and did provide several levels and ways of autonomy. I want to briefly discuss some successes and limitations of Maroon communities. I will discuss Maroon community named after their first leader, Xanga, in Mexico. Also, communities in Jamaica, led by Queen Annie and Cujo. Finally, I will discuss Palmares, a community in Brazil that lasted close to 100 years. First one I will talk about is Xanga. And this Maroon society was formed around the mid-16th century in the Americas. And it was formed by Xanga, who escaped from a sugar plantation around 1570 and led a group of escaped slaves into the rugged highlands of what is today Veracruz. There he established a Maroon community known as San Lorenzo de los Negros. It would later be renamed Xanga, which became a symbol of resistance against the Spanish colonial system. Xanga's community faced numerous struggles, including constant threats from Spanish forces. Despite these challenges, the Maroons created a self-sustained society that operated independently from colonial rule. The community was strategically located in the mountainous region of Orizaba, which provided natural defenses against attacks. The economic structure of Xanga society was based on subsistence, agricultural, hunting, and raids on Spanish settlements for supplies. This allowed the Maroons to sustain themselves while disrupting the colonial economy. The society's government was likely a form of communal leadership with Xanga at the helm, demonstrating a form of organized resistance against the hierarchical and exploitative structures of colonialism. Xanga and his followers resisted racial capitalism by rejecting the commodification of their labor and lives. Their successful defense against Spanish forces in 1609 led to a negotiated settlement. The peace settlement between Xanga and Spanish authorities in 1618 granted the Maroon community self-rule in exchange for tribute and a promise to return escaped slaves. They granted them autonomy, showcased their ability to resist and subvert the colonial economic system. However, the community still faced economic challenges, such as limited resources and constant threats of re-enslavement or extermination by the Spanish. Despite these limitations, Xanga's community represented a significant challenge to the racial hierarchies and social exploitation of colonial Mexico. Their existence demonstrated that it was possible to live outside of the oppressive structures of racial hierarchies and complete commodification of their bodies, albeit with significant struggles and limitations. In Jamaica, there would be two very famous leaders of Maroon communities. Cujo and Queen Nanny were prominent leaders of the Jamaican Maroons who lived roughly during the late 17th and early 18th century. Cujo, born around 1680, became the leader of the Leeward Maroons, while Queen Nanny, who was active during the same period, led the Windward Maroons. Both figures are celebrated for their roles in establishing and maintaining Maroon communities that resisted British colonial rule. Cujo and Queen Nanny, as Maroon leaders, had distinct daily roles rooted in governments and defense. Cujo focused on political leadership, negotiating treaties, and coordinating raids against British colonialism. He was responsible for the overall strategy and diplomacy, ensuring the autonomy of the Leeward Maroons. Queen Nanny's everyday roles included military leadership, organizing and training guerrilla fighters, and maintaining the spiritual and cultural life of the Windward Maroons. She was also a healer and advisor, using her knowledge of herbs and spiritual practices to support her communities. Their leadership ensured the Maroons' resilience and independence. The Maroon communities in Jamaica were composed of escaped slaves who established autonomous settlements in the island's mountainous regions. These communities faced numerous challenges, including military attacks by British forces and internal division. However, through guerrilla warfare tactics and intimate knowledge of the terrain, they managed to resist and survive. Cujo's leadership culminated in the 1739 Peace Treaty with the British, which granted the Leeward Maroons autonomy and land rights. This treaty was a significant victory against the racial capitalist colonialist system, although it came with the compromise of returning runaway slaves to the British. Queen Nanny, revered as a national hero as well, led her community in this struggle, preserving African cultural practices and unifying the Maroons in their resistance. The Jamaican Maroons developed an economic system based on agriculture, hunting, and limited trade. They created self-sufficient communities that challenged the plantation economy of the British. By maintaining their autonomy and cultural heritage, they resisted racial capitalism, colonialism that sought to exploit their labor. However, a world in which racial slavery and colonialism existed also imposed limitations on the Maroons. The treaties with the British required them to return slaves, which undermined their resistance to the broader system of slavery and colonialism. Additionally, their economic activities were restricted by their need to remain hidden and defensively against British attacks. Another example of fighting against colonialism and racial capitalism and slavery at large was the Colombo of Palmares. Palmares, a large Maroon society in northeastern Brazil, was one of the most significant examples of resistance to a racial capitalistic America. Established in the early 17th century, perhaps 1605, Palmares was a confederation of maroon communities that housed thousands of escaped slaves, indigenous people, and marginalized Europeans. In Brazil, these societies were known as quilombos. At its height, some scholars have argued these quilombos had united and reached up to 20,000. The most known leader of this quilombo community, Palmares, was a leader by the name of Xanga, and he emerged around 1665 as a key leader in the fight against Portuguese colonialism. Under his leadership, Palmares resisted multiple Portuguese exhibitions aimed at dismantling the community. Palmares was unique in its size and organization, functioning almost as an independent state. The society had its own political and military structures, with leaders like Ganja Zamba and later Zumbi. The community was highly organized with a central leadership that coordinated defense and economic activities. The economic structure of Palmares was based on subsistence, agriculture, hunting, and trade. The Colombo produced food-crafted goods and engaged in trade with neighboring communities. This economic self-sufficiency allowed Palmares to sustain itself for over a century, resisting the Portuguese colonial economy that relied on slavery. Palmares faced significant challenges, including constant military threats from the Portuguese. In 1694, a large Portuguese force succeeded in destroying Palmares, and Zumbi was captured and executed in 1695. Despite this defeat, the legacy of Palmares as a symbol of resistance against colonialism, racial capitalism, and slavery endures. The community's success included its ability to maintain autonomy and self-sufficiency for over a century, creating a refuge for escaped slaves and resisting the racial colonial system. However, its limitations were evident in its eventual defeat and the constant threat of re-enslavement or extermination. Despite this defeat, the legacy of Palmares as a symbol of resistance against racism, colonialism, and the economic order, the community's success included its ability to maintain autonomy and self-sufficiency for over a century, creating a refuge for escaped slaves and resisting the colonial racialized order. However, its limitations were evident in its eventual defeat and the constant threat of re-enslavement or extermination, as I've said. After the collapse of Palmares, some slaves managed to escape and survive, though much is not known about this. We do know Palmares was not the first maroon community, it was not the last. However, there would never be such a large and powerful maroon community again, with the exception of Haiti. And I will detail that in another video. In conclusion, the maroon communities of Xanga, Jamaica, and Palmares illustrate both the successes and challenges faced in resisting a racial capitalistic system. These communities managed to establish autonomous societies that preserved African cultural identities and provided refuge for escaped slaves, directly challenging the economic foundations of slavery and colonialism. The existence was a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of enslaved people in the face of systematic oppression. However, the limitations were also significant. The need to negotiate treaties with colonial powers, as seen with Cujo's Treaty in Jamaica, often forced Maroons into compromise that undermined their resistance. The destruction of Palmares and the eventual suppression of many Maroon communities underscore the relentless pressures of colonial forces and the difficulties in sustaining the long-term resistance. From these histories, we learn the importance of autonomy, cultural preservation, and strategic resistance in challenging oppressive systems. Maroon communities were not just physical spaces of refuge, but also a powerful symbol of defiance against a racial capitalistic order. Despite their limitations, their legacies continue to inspire contemporary movements for social and economic justice. The study of Maroon communities' resistance against racial capitalism, colonialism, and the legacy of slavery offer valuable insights into the broader struggles for freedom and equality. These communities demonstrated that it was possible to resist and create alternatives to oppressive societies, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Its successes and limitations highlight the complexity of resistance and the need for solidarity and strategic planning in the fight against oppression. Thank you.